Hi, Carl Lucas here. What is manga? And is it killing the comic book industry? Well, there are a lot of people that think wokeness is destroying the comic book industry, which is a simple excuse to a very difficult question. This is a multifaceted issue revolving around the production of manga versus comics, talent acquisition, cost, distribution, publications, profit margins, and rights issues, and is much too complicated to simply be boiled down to just politics. There is no good way to structure all of this, by the way, but a good place to start is the production costs for manga versus comics. Besides the obvious that manga is read from right to left, manga is well known for its lack of colors. It's drawn exclusively in black and white and is commonly published weekly. On the other side, we have comics which are very colorful. That's kind of their thing. Comics are usually published monthly on Wednesdays, at least by the big two, Marvel and DC. Manga can either be completely original like One Piece, an adaptation of light novels like Legend of the Shield Hero, or a reimagination or redraw of earlier series, the best example here being One Punch Man that was initially drawn by One and then later redrawn by professional mangaka Yusuke Murata. Sorry for the pronunciation here. I have barely seen any comics that are based on other media, but they do exist. For example, there are the Dune comics that are based on the Dune books, and the Star Wars comics that are based on the Star Wars movies. So, what about the costs? It is difficult to find out how much exactly manga costs to make, but given that you typically need one mangaka, one background artist/assistant, and an editor for the production of manga, I would say a manga team is fairly small. Of course, super successful series like One Piece, Demon Slayer, or My Hero Academia will have more resources and cost more money to make because the mangaka are being paid more, but generally speaking, the production of a manga is easy to handle. For comics, you usually have a main artist, a colorist, a inker, a letterer, which is optional, a writer, and an editor. That is almost double the amount of people that you need for a manga, and comics are in color, so will automatically always cost way more to produce a comic versus a manga. Again, there are individual cases where these roles might differ in comics and manga, especially if you go into the realm of completely independent artists, but I'm talking generally about the wider industry. It is cheaper and faster to produce manga versus comic. So this is only the production side of things. What about the distribution? Now, we all know how books are sold, I assume. A store buys X amount of books, puts it on a shelf, and then we buy it. The big difference between manga and comics is that getting into manga is much easier than getting into comics. If you want to get into a new manga series, it's easy. You walk in and grab volume 1 off the shelf. But getting into comics is a bit different. Even if you find volume 1 of a new series, chances are, unless it's an independent comic like Invincible or Saga, it won't be the beginning of the story or the character. And to help explain, let's ask an expert where to start reading Batman.
You would think it would be easy to get into Batman, just walk into a comic book shop, pick up number 1, go from there. But Batman's first appearance isn't even in Batman number 1, it's in Detective Comics number 27. And even that's not an origin story. Most comic book fans consider year 1 to be the best origin story, and that's like Batman number 404 through 407, 400 issues after the fucking beginning. And that's not even the only origin story. More recently, we have Zero Year by Scott Snyder, which are volumes 4 and 5 of his run. Not to be confused with volumes 4 and 5 of Tom King's run. Honestly, going back to Scott Snyder, volume 1 of Scott Snyder's run is a pretty decent place to start off on. I mean, you need to know some backstory, like who the Robins are, who the villains are, but we pretty much know who those are. We've seen the Batman movies, we've played the games. Or if you just want to read a good standalone story, you can read The Long Halloween, or even Hush. But if you're going to read Hush, you kind of need to know Death in the Family, not to be confused with Death of the Family by Scott Snyder, which is volume 3 of his run.
As you can tell, getting into comics is just a tad more difficult than manga, which understandably can deter new readers. After all, if you don't know where to start, why start at all? But say you have done your required reading and you're ready to jump into weekly comics. Well, in the manga world, you do have publishers that release individual books, but the primary way manga is distributed is through weekly or monthly magazines like Shonen Jump. Currently, there is no equivalent to Shonen Jump in the comic book world. You have the big two, DC and Marvel, then you have the more independent stuff like Image, Dark Horse, IDW, and Valiant, and that's basically it. And if you want to read a new series by any of these companies, you will have to spend close to half of what it costs to buy a volume of manga on a 32-page single issue riddled with ads. In the manga industry, things are much easier. There are close to 50 of those Shonen Jump type magazines aimed at various different target audiences in completely different age spectrums, and for that, you need a fuck ton of content. How do you get that content? Well, there is a constant search for new talent, and you can think of those magazines as the end goal for a mangaka and a proving ground for their series. A mangaka will be approved for a one-shot or miniseries based on their previous success, and if it does well, they will be picked up for an ongoing series. There are even popularity polls printed inside of those magazines, meaning that you're getting real-time feedback on how certain characters are doing and how certain series are doing at all times from its own audience. Basically, manga created this system where we'll get a constant influx of new series from a vast amount of creators covering a vast amount of topics, targeting a vast amount of audiences with a giant age spectrum, meaning no matter who you are, there's manga for you. The super successful series like Demon Slayer, Dr. Stone, Black Clover, Jujutsu Kaisen, and so on then get exported to other countries, but there's so many series you will never see in your entire life because they already have been weeded out domestically in Japan. Meaning that you're always getting the creme de la creme of manga outside of Japan, and that, I think, increases the chance of the series succeeding. So, what about comics? Well, like I said, there are no Shonen Jump equivalents in the comic book industry. You can make a list at your comic book store where you can get weekly issues, but that's not the same as having a magazine where you don't have to think about what you're getting. In the comic book industry, at least in the big two, Marvel and DC, you have an editorial team with writers, marketers, managers, assistants, and many more trying to steer these giant franchises into profitability. What happens often is that you have popular characters and the company wants to make money based on a brand. A writer or a writer team is assigned or pitches the idea to the editorial team. We then get a run or story arc from those writers, and here's where the cracks start to form. Sometimes in the middle of a run, the writers get fired because the books aren't selling, or the writers leave because they couldn't write what they wanted, and the story arc is left unfinished. So new writers are brought in to finish the story, which most of the times leads into very confusing stories with a bunch of holes and cracks and unfinished threads. Also, unlike manga, in the comic book world, you don't have these constant influx of completely new worlds with completely new characters and completely new plots. It's the same world written by different people, which makes characters very inconsistent. The same hero can be a dumbass in one run and a super genius in another. They can be overpowered in one version and absolutely useless in another. They can be completely unimportant in one story and retcon everything in another. And you might think, why? Why is that? Well, because of a thing called risk aversion. What is more likely to sell? Spider-Man issue 1 or Hero X? It's a rhetorical question. Of course it's Spider-Man issue 1. Nobody knows who Hero X is. It could be the best book ever written in the existence of books written by humankind, but nobody would care. From an economical perspective, it is much safer to invest in another Spider-Man story than it is to create a completely new world with a completely new character. With that said, comics are great, and without them we wouldn't have characters like Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Black Widow, Misty Knight, Stargirl, Luke Cage, which is literally my name patron. We wouldn't have a bunch of movies that are great and people enjoy, and as much as I would like to fanboy over my hypocritical heroes, we need to move on. Anime is just advertisement for manga. I've heard this somewhere and it stuck with me because it's true. Every 4 months, you get this huge cycle of new shows to watch. Most of them just get one season because they didn't make enough money, but at that point, the watcher has the option to just drop it, or they could just read the manga. Of course, not every show will be a winner, but if you're releasing up to 40 shows every 4 months, one will stick. We will talk about the quality of these shows in a second, but first, let's have a look at the cartoon side of things. Well, on the DC side, we have roughly one animated movie every 6 months, with my favorite being Dark Knight Returns, which I highly recommend. In the past, TV was full of great comic cartoons like Batman, Justice League, Spider-Man, X-Men, but almost every other series developed in the last decade or so has been cancelled. Now, all we're left with is Teen Titans Go. The main reason for cancelling so many great series is toy sales, because you can't have a good cartoon if you can't sell millions of toys alongside with it. Apparently, cartoons and toys have been heavily tied in the past few decades, and the best example here is Transformers, that literally started as a toy, and then a cartoon was made to sell that toy. You might have noticed that we didn't mention live action shows at all because I don't think they are in the same ecosystems as cartoons, mangas, comics, and anime. CW shows are absolutely trash tier garbage. Complete technical failures, and the writing is objectively bad. There's one exception called Stargirl, but it would be nice if they stopped fucking talking about the secret identities in the middle of the fucking road. HBO shows like Doom Patrol and Titans at least look good, but I have not watched them and neither am I interested in them. There's also a show called Black Lightning, and while I enjoyed it, it's a bit boring. Marvel shows are for the most part pretty okay-ish. After Iron Fist, it became a bit of a shit show. While the Disney Plus series are pretty well received and a bunch of people still watch these shows, the universe is slowly breaking because it feels like every writer is writing a different origin story for the multiverse. Like cartoons, I don't see a direct path from any CW or Marvel show to a specific comic like I can see the direct path from a specific anime to a specific manga. And since we are talking about quality of shows, let's move on to the topic of So, besides the obvious stylistic difference between anime and cartoons, you also have the major difference that usually cartoons are barely made in their respective country. Writing, storyboarding, conceptualization, and general pre-production happens in America, and then most of it is shipped to South Korea to be drawn and colorized. While there is animation done in America, most of it is done outside of the country because 1. It's cheaper, 2. It's faster, and 3. You don't run the risk having to adhere to workers' rights. Anime, on the other hand, is almost exclusively drawn in Japan, and that is why you have so many Japanese-based studios to work on several different shows at all times. If you ever looked up how Japanese animators are treated, you will soon find out that they are underpaid, overworked, and workers' rights are trampled on with pride. The cause might be a combination of Japan's very lax workers' rights, anime is seen as a cultural good that you should be proud to work on, and the extremely toxic relationship to work in Japanese culture. So, while both media are pretty close to how they are produced, Japan has the advantage that everything is done in-house. There is no communication barrier between those studios because they all speak the same language, and since they all work in the same place, exchange of information is much faster even between studios. Having to ship all your concepts to a completely different country that might or might not speak your language makes the process of making a cartoon very difficult, and that is one of the main reasons why cartoons take such a long time to make. While communication is now easier than ever with the wonderful invention we call the internet, face-to-face communication is still faster and easier for humans to understand. We could talk about the amount of drawings per episode in cartoons versus anime, but that will heavily depend on the series. Generally speaking, they are pretty close, and then you have a few exceptions, for example like Legend of Korra that increased the amount of drawings per episode to make the animation more fluid, and then on the other side you have something like One Piece that uses every animation trick possible to artificially increase the runtime of an episode, making it have less drawings overall. It's also difficult to compare the two since their volume and quality of anime vary so much more than cartoons. Finally, the part everyone has been waiting for, the reason why you probably are here, the often cited wokeness of comic books, or simply politics. Let me ask you a question. How many woke comic books do you actually know? I'm Not Starfire, New Warriors that got cancelled, Jordan Peterson as the Red Skull, Mockingbird having a shirt saying, "Ask me about my feminist agenda," Trump as MODOK, Superman's son being declared bisexual. Out of literally hundreds of comic books being released every year by the big two, there are few of them that have quote-unquote woke narratives. The majority of stories are just your run-of-the-mill stories dealing with your run-of-the-mill supervillains. The issue is not politics. The issue is not that the stories are woke. The issue is that the reader doesn't have a choice. For a more personal example, I have a run of Black Widow where she goes on a secret mission for S.H.I.E.L.D. and it ends after the third volume because they have a giant world event happening afterwards. No wokeness, no politics, just Widow killing people, but the run is over after 3 volumes because the universe is in danger or something, and they absolutely need an acrobatic redhead with no superpowers at all. Do you think I'm going to continue buying Marvel comics if every time I start reading a story I'm left behind because they just stopped the story of the hero I like because the world has been eradicated or something else? Of course not. Nobody gives a shit if the story is woke or not. If the story is good, the story is good. And it sells. But because Marvel and DC want to minimize the risk and increase the return on investment, they are trying to appeal to new readers while also keeping their old readers happy. To quote a supervillain here,
and when everyone's super, no one will be.
On the manga side, you have a never-ending stream of new characters, new worlds, new stories, covering a vast amount of topics, set in completely different places, trying to appeal so many different people, in so many different age groups, and it works! If you don't like One Piece, you have hundreds more of action manga to read. If you don't like Death Note, you have hundreds more of thriller manga to read. If you don't like Evangelion, you have hundreds more of mecha manga to read. You have choices. You have so many choices in manga compared to comics, and it drives me nuts whenever some dumb fuck tries to explain the obvious economical reasons why manga is selling more than comic books with wokeness, often forgetting that comics always have been political and woke. The X-Men are literally an analogy for the civil rights movements. The Dark Knight Returns is literally about American exceptionalism, individualism, and fucking terrorism. If you haven't seen that, then you have not been paying attention. And Civil War is literally about authoritarians versus America. Fuck yeah! People that claim that wokeness is destroying the comic book industry are missing the obvious reasons why the comic book industry is so fucked. It's not because now comics have suddenly become more political and woke. It's not because manga is so much red-pilled than comics. The main reason is that we have these two giant companies basically having a duopoly and constantly trying to appeal to everyone because the profit margins can't only be good, they have to be extraordinary. Meanwhile, forgetting that comics are not for everyone. The only political teaching you can take out of this is that capitalism is ruining your comics and not fucking wokeness, but both of those positions are wrong. The reason why manga always wins over comics is because it's easier and cheaper to produce, has bigger profit margins, and there's a bustling ecosystem to produce manga and its adjacent media anime in a single place, and not because of fucking wokeness. Hi, Carl here. I'm sorry I got heated, but I feel very strongly about this since I see a lot of these dumb takes also parroted by a bunch of other people, and I hate it. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Consider giving me money on Patreon, otherwise I will go to your home and stab your kneecaps. Give me your money. As always, take care of yourselves and have a nice, wonderful day.